This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to writer and researcher Antoine Brimbal. He also runs moderninsurgent.org. He's going to be speaking to us about the ongoing tension in Kosovo. Yes, again, this time it's looking quite serious. Serb troops have been put on high alert on the border there. There's been a lot of tension. Some think Putin wants to open a new front via Serbia. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please support us at patreon.com/popularfront. Also, check out our new documentary at youtube.com/popularfront. So, Antoine, I feel like every 6 months there's something new happening in Kosovo, and every single time I feel like it's like, well, this time it's actually serious. This time it's actually serious. But this time it does feel more serious, I think, because of Ukraine. The war is obviously ongoing there. There's a big difference between, most Serbians and the Serbian state supports Russia whilst also being part of the West. And everybody else on that side of things generally, supports Ukraine. So I do think there's a different context to it at the moment. But before we get into all that, maybe give us an idea of what's been happening recently in the last few months. I understand the Serbian troops in Kosovo are on high alert right now. Why is that?
Yeah, that's correct, actually. So, like you said, it always feels like it's serious. But this time it could be, let's say, the one. Well, hopefully not, but that's the signs we're getting anyway. Well, for the most part, this is the 7th time in 5 years that Serbian troops have been placed on high alert, at the Kosovo border. And this all followed a pretty basic policy, actually. It was a policy by the Kosovo government where they wanted to remove all Serbian license plates. And essentially, they wanted to oblige, all citizens within Kosovo, so even the Serbian ones, the ethnically Serbian ones, to adopt Kosovo license plates. Now, to no surprise, this led to a lot of outrage, notably amongst the Serbian population there. It led to some roadblocks by Serbs in Kosovo. So these roadblocks, just bus drivers, truck drivers would park their cars and completely block any form of transport within the region. But the truth is that this recent escalation isn't only about license plates. Although there are some people, especially a lot of ethnic Serbs who are against the license plates because they don't recognize Kosovo. It's mostly because the Serbian minority in the region views this policy as like the first step to the overall expulsion of their people, from the region. So that's the main argument that there is right now in Serbs in Kosovo. Is that it begins with license plates, but that over time these policies are going to continue evolving until more and more Serbian elements are expelled from the country. And so there's been a lot of unrest recently. A lot of Serbs also decided to resign from numerous institutions. Many Serbs in Kosovo resigned as police officers, judges, mayors. Actually, in fact, as of today or as of right now, there are almost no Serbian police officers, judges, or mayors left in Kosovo. And while, it's still a bit ambiguous, while many of them did resign because they're angered, there are also allegations that the Serbian government pressured them into, leaving these institutions. It's a lot of chaos right now in Kosovo. But like you said, this happens quite a lot of the time. So,
and why would the Serbian government pressure people into quitting their jobs in Kosovo? Is it some kind of provocation? Why would they do that?
Well, the answer is quite complex. Although they would definitely want to put pressure on Kosovo, it's also a way to show that the ethnic Serbs aren't happy with the Kosovo government. But I think a lot of it has to do with the influence of the war, perhaps. For years now, let's say, there's been sort of a social media war between Kosovo and Serbia. Both parties for the past decade, they photographed their troops ready to fight, but no fighting actually ever took place. And so, as I mentioned earlier, this is the 7th time in 5 years that Serbian troops are placed on high alert. This is because historically Serbia is, one of Russia's main allies. So this is what, it has to do with the war. Russia, apart from being, the Orthodox Slavic brothers, as they often call them in Serbia, they also helped against the Central Powers in World War I. And so ever since Serbia has sort of agreed with Russia politically, and now that Russia is confronting Ukraine, there's rumors that Moscow is also pushing for a conflict within the Balkans, so sort of like a second front, if you want it. And so this is not an unlikely speculation, and I'll get to that in just a second. But that's why there's rumors that the Serbian government is sort of perhaps pressuring, notably policemen, to resign from their positions. It's the sort of idea that, well, if the policemen and the judges resign from their spots, this shows that even the people aren't content with the current situation, and it's just putting a lot of pressure, especially on the Kosovo government, and notably in terms of their policy towards Serbs. So like the license plate incident. But actually, as I was mentioning, it's not unlikely. The speculation overall isn't unlikely, especially given that the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, Maria Zakharova, she stated that the escalations only had Kosovo to blame due to quote-unquote groundless discriminatory rules. And so then likewise, a Serbian member of parliament in Vucic's party said that Serbia should aim to denazify the Balkans. So this was a direct quote, and it's the exact same language used by Putin. Now, the MP apologized for his words later on, but the notion is still there. It's very clear that Russia and Serbia are perhaps not outright allies at the moment, but they are definitely supporting their political decisions to an extent. And so this would justify or explain, per se, why the Serbian government will be pressuring the Serbs in Kosovo.
That is really interesting. I did not know they were using that kind of denazification rhetoric. I don't know, it's a very weird thing to say. In some ways, it's kind of the perfect setting if that's, it's literally come out of Putin's mouth. You've been in Kosovo on the Serbian side, talking to people recently. What did you kind of gather from your average man and woman on the streets kind of feelings towards all of this?
Sure. Well, I was mostly based in Serbia. Right now, getting to Kosovo is very, very tricky, especially obviously when I was there were the blockades, the barrages and stuff. But one of them, let's say, I think one of the main other ways, so I'll get to like sort of my study in just a second, but from what I've noticed, the main way that sort of like the Ukraine war is influencing the Serbian perspective is through this perception, I think. So, when we study international relations and contemporary conflicts, we often hear the term Western hypocrisy. And it seems that Serbs are using that more than ever right now. To them, Kosovo is state-sponsored separatism because Albania funded the KLA and it backed Kosovo's struggle for independence. And similarly, Donetsk and Luhansk in Ukraine, there are instances of state-sponsored separatism as well. So what I've noticed, when I was on the ground and talking to people, is that to Serbs, it's unclear why the West per se is supporting Kosovo, but not supporting Luhansk and Donetsk, because essentially from the Serbian perspective, the West recognizing the independence of a breakaway region is actually what showed Russia that it can do the same. And so there's been this sense really of hypocrisy from the West. A lot of Serbs, I am half Serbian myself, so when I go back home and talk to my family, there is this rhetoric very present there. Notably after the Third Balkan Wars, a lot of people talked about it. A lot of people talked about the damage that the West had brought onto Serbia. And now that there's the war in Ukraine, that narrative is more alive than ever.
I mean, I think that is fair, though. I mean, Western hypocrisy is absolutely hilarious when you're talking about this. Not to say that anyone should have been allowed to be killed or massacred or whatever, but there is some point to it. It's not like it's kind of a juvenile way to look at it in some ways, because obviously just sponsoring a separatist region is not. It's not that simple. Oh, they're separatists, so therefore it depends what the ideology is, where they're coming from, who else is involved. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of like Western hypocrisy. I mean, that's kind of run of the mill, in terms of like the Western rhetoric.
No, actually, to expand on that, one of the other things is that like there's this big notion that the Cold War to some extent is still present. So obviously they don't, genuinely, literally mean that the Cold War is going on, but they think that the sort of geopolitical divide is still very present. And so like to them, the only reason as to why the West is backing Ukraine and not Serbia is because of their Russian ally. So many Serbs, they believe that the West only supports Kosovo because Serbia is an ally of Russia, and that they don't support, like Luhansk and Donetsk because it opposes Russia. So there's still, in this sense, they view that the Cold War, this conflict, is still very active. And that's something that's really interesting.
Yeah, especially, I mean, it makes sense, any country would, but it seems their only kind of seeing it through the prism of their own country.
For sure, for sure.
How invested are people in the situation in Kosovo? I know it's, online, you see people saying things, oh, absolutely, Kosovo is Serbian, or on the other side, Kosovo is Albanian. Generally, how do you think people are feeling towards this when no one's looking?
Yeah. Well, actually, the truth is, this sort of tension goes much, further than just comments on Instagram or TikTok. So every sort of, let's say, comment section when it comes to the Balkans will have, let's say, like keyboard warriors, proclaiming that Albania or Serbia is the greatest country in the world. But this sort of tension does go much further beyond that. It's not just, online.
Right.
And we can see that actually. Well, I'll stick to the online example for one. For example, the Red Star football team, which is the biggest football team, or let's say the most popular one within Serbia, actually posted a video of their ultras singing "Kosovo is Serbia," and it's really funny to see how, well, not funny but also interesting, from a political perspective, how even football teams do genuinely care about geopolitics, especially when it has to do with Kosovo. So the care is definitely still there. And actually, while I was in Serbia, I decided to interview some people, get some responses to some questions, because I wanted to use the opportunity to understand what Serbian citizens want as of now, and also how they view the current situation. Obviously, I am half Serbian, so a lot of the time when I go back to Serbia, I get so much exposure to so many different opinions. But I view things from a very academic perspective, and I really wanted to see, well, okay, if I go onto the street and ask a bunch of people the same questions, how will their answers vary? And actually, I asked around 10 questions, but I've just picked out 5 of the most interesting ones. And so, yeah, I'll just read them one by one, sort of the main elements from them. And so, yeah, the first question I was asking the people in Serbian, obviously, was, do you believe that the benefits of recognizing Kosovo outweigh the costs? We often get this, narrative, especially among Serbian politicians, that recognizing Kosovo has a lot of benefits. Some others say that it has more costs. And I wanted to know what the people have to think about it. And out of the 40 people that responded to my questions, only 9 of them thought there were more benefits to recognizing Kosovo. And the 31 others thought there were more benefits in keeping Kosovo. So trying to, gain it back in a way. And so out of those 9 people that were, let's say, more progressive, more liberal in that sense, their main arguments was that recognizing Kosovo as an independent state would help Serbia not only move on, but also perhaps open the doors for an integration into the EU. And what I found interesting was that none of them explicitly mentioned, the West. They all talked about the EU. And so I thought that was particularly interesting. And then, to no surprise, out of the 31 people who were talking about, keeping Kosovo or trying to get Kosovo back on the Serbian side, the vast majority, they highlighted the importance of Kosovo for Serbian national identity, for the feeling of sovereignty, but also from the resistance from Western bullying. So, we were talking about Western hypocrisy earlier, and once again, this topic appeared in this question here. A lot of the people said that Serbia must not back down from the sort of bullying coming from the West, and that keeping or regaining Kosovo was absolutely fundamental. And one of the other really interesting questions I was asking to people was, is war worth regaining Kosovo? And out of the 38 people, there were 2 people who decided to stop responding to the questions. But out of the 38 people who responded to this one, 30 people actually said that war was not worth it. The vast majority said that war would lead to more bombing, more pain, just like we've seen in the late 90s, and would lead to even further economic catastrophes, So the scars of the Third Balkan Wars are definitely still there. There's definitely a willingness to try and keep Kosovo or regain Kosovo on the Serbian side, but it seems that the general population does not want war, especially now with the war in Ukraine. People are more exposed to the consequences of such conflict. So this is a very interesting result in its own sense. But yeah, so these I asked a bunch of questions. These were the 2 main important ones. Really showed that the Serbian population in general, from this small sample that I had interviewed, the majority wanted to keep Kosovo, but also didn't want to engage in direct conflict for it.
To see a modern war in Europe, like Ukraine, as we've seen, how unbelievably brutal it has been, Russia just absolutely just killing children, all sorts of stuff. I guess then it's a little bit not closer to home as such, but I think it's definitely like, oh, okay, right. It's gonna be like that. It's not gonna be like whenever. Not to say that people have forgotten what the war was like, but I think the next generation certainly they didn't grow up with that. So I think that's a great point you've made there. Do you think though that this will be completely different if you were actually in Kosovo doing this? I mean, I'm sure there would be a different response there. It's going to be, I guess, there's quite a big difference between your average Serb on the Serbian side versus your Serbian Kosovo.
No, yeah, absolutely. And actually, so the let's say the sort of demographics of Kosovo are quite complicated. But according to the 2022 World Population Review, 92% of Kosovo is ethnic Albanian, and only around 5% are Orthodox Serbs. So if I was in Kosovo and I was asking a Serbian, a Serbian Kosovar, or a Serbian Kosovo, the way you see it, the vast majority of them perhaps would be more extreme or more radical towards those beliefs. Especially now, we've seen it with the barrages, the roadblocks. The Serbs living in Kosovo are definitely more tense on the situation because they experience it firsthand. But I also think that the opposite is true. I think perhaps we would have gotten more lenient answers as well. And to put that into perspective, after there were some attempts to de-escalation recently, many of the roadblocks were removed by the Serbs themselves. So many of the Serbs actually mobilized and decided to move the trucks out of the way, even if they weren't theirs. So there is this sort of divide even within Serbs in Kosovo. So the Balkans is a very complicated place, but it never stops getting more and more difficult, more complex. And this is just another example of that. There are Serbs who prefer keeping Kosovo, others who don't. And even if we were on the Kosovo side, this divide would also, in my opinion, it would also stay there. And so, the Kosovo government, notably the police, at first they blamed the roadblocks for, they call them Serbian gangs. And they also actually arrested multiple people on, they accused them of planning terrorism, or inciting violence. So it shows that, many of them perhaps are more, let's say, looking for violence. But the opposite is also true, in my opinion. There's also Serbs in Kosovo who don't want this escalation and who tend to have the same nuance as people in Belgrade or in Novi Sad.
Yeah, I think there's a very, unfortunately, normalized effort, particularly from people in the West, to see everyone in the Balkans as a kind of cartoon character monolith. Everybody thinks this, acting as if people eat rocks for breakfast and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So yeah, that does actually make sense as well. I actually went over to the Serbian side when I went to Kosovo over the bridge in Mitrovica. Unfortunately, the first thing you see when I went was, this was like 2016, 17 now. But the first thing you saw was this, I don't know, like 100-foot banner of Putin sprawled out on this big block of flats, and everyone we talked to there was like, fuck you, da 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 da, which obviously it's like, I'm an outsider, I just walked over from the other side, they're like, who the fuck are you, blah blah blah. But Serbs that I am friends with, have many, all of them seem to have differing opinions on the situation. So yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. This, in terms of this kind of alleged terror attack that was planned, it was specifically, from what I've been reading, there was a police officer who quit his job when in protest, and allegedly was then, I think the Albanians said he was planning a terror attack. He was arrested, then he was released on house arrest. What was that all about?
Yeah, so that's correct, actually. So after the roadblocks, there were also some gunshots, following the detention of a former Serbian police officer, the one you just mentioned. That was on December 10th. So there are reports that the local Kosovar police exchanged fire, but it's completely unknown or ambiguous as to who they exchanged fire with, and it's really unconfirmed where their shots came from. But on the bright side, no one was killed or hurt. But that obviously did lead to Serbian forces being placed on high alert. And as you mentioned, with the detention of that Serbian police officer, that's also what fueled the resignations that I was talking about earlier. Many Serbs in Kosovo resigned their positions as judges, mayors, and police officers because they deemed that the Kosovo government was unfair to them and was, essentially seeking their, well, eradication is a strong word, but essentially seeking their expulsion from the territory. That's the way they viewed it. And yeah, the detention of that police officer was just essentially one more step towards that as they viewed it.
And where's that at now?
Well, the police officer has been released, and as we know now, the roadblocks have been, obviously, many of the roadblocks have disappeared. But what's interesting is that the tensions still haven't gone away. Obviously, NATO with its KFOR units on the territory, and as well as the UN, trying to calm things down, it's actually had a bit of a opposite impact, if I can put it. So actually, one of the plans that NATO and the UN are trying to persuade Serbia and Kosovo of is called the French-German system. And that's what it's called according to Nemanja Rujevic, which is a correspondent of the Deutsche Welle in Serbia. And the reason as to why it's called the French and German system was because they often think that it's a very Western system that's based on a lot of assumptions that don't actually work in the real world. So a lot of the Serbs are against this plan. And, the system essentially implies that Serbia wouldn't have to recognize Kosovo as an independent entity, but it also wouldn't have the authority to prevent Kosovo from joining international institutions, so like the UN. Serbia is evidently very against this idea, and it's fair to assume that Kosovo is as well, because there is a clear, very, very, both sides are almost as opposite as it can be. Kosovo won't settle for anything less than complete independence, and Serbia doesn't seem to, want to concede anything. They completely want to keep in their eyes Kosovo. And so this proposal that's come after this de-escalation, after the roadblocks, after the detention of this police officer, it seems that it's provoked the Serbian government more than anything. So yeah, there are reports that all the escalation has gone down since, but that's not entirely true.
It was only, I think, maybe 2 years or a year and a half ago that there were very serious clashes in Serbia, anti-government clashes. People were sick to death of the prime minister or president. Sorry. What's his situation right now? Are people happier with him? Do you think he's using this as a way to kind of deflect from? I know a lot of that criticism was ongoing, especially the way they handled the protests. What's his situation?
Well, actually, it's quite interesting because, okay, so as you mentioned, two years ago, there was this sort of, it was a mass campaign of riots, essentially, against Aleksandar Vučić, which is the Serbian president. And the response was that numerous police officers were caught essentially just beating civilians. And a lot of reports, after and during the course of events revealed that Aleksandar Vučić had purposely turned, or he had utilized some, let's say, sectors of the population and purposely turned them against other parts. So Aleksandar Vučić has this sort of plan, and there's reports that he's doing the same in Kosovo. It's a bit, difficult to explain, but essentially Vučić, especially during those protests 2 years ago, he would find some people, a group of people, whether they were hooligans, football hooligans, or other just criminals, and he would make them fight other people or other people rioting. And so that would sort of justify, per se, right? Justify, in quotation marks, the intervention of the police. So that's how often he's gone away with, implementing force. And this is why those reports that I mentioned earlier took place in Kosovo as well. That's why there's reports that he's the one who pushed, the Serbs to resign their positions within Kosovo institutions.
Yeah, that's very much like what happened in Ukraine in 2014, when the Russian-backed President Yanukovych, when he didn't want to leave, he set up not directly him, but his kind of the soup that he was involved in, people around him set up the Tatushki, which essentially was the same thing, recruiting and forming hooligans and various different combat sports gyms, and then sending them after people and then justifying it. It's a very Kremlin type situation, to be honest with you.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. Yeah, this is what many people call that, the textbook play of Aleksandar Vučić.
Yeah. So obviously people are not completely happy with him, But do you think they'll follow him into a war? Is that where it's at, or not?
Well, once again, these type of questions are very, very difficult to tell because there's always a lot of nuance to them. But it's sure that pressure on Vucic is higher than ever. There's a lot of people, especially during my time in Serbia, one of the Serbian news outlets released a sort of documentary where they were just outright criticizing him and comparing him to well, the worst you can, the worst thing you can imagine. And so even now in the media, there's a lot of criticism against Vucic, but that's not to say that there's also not, that's also, there's still loyalists. That's no surprise. There's still people who believe in Vucic. Now, to determine whether they would follow him into a war is a very complicated task. But what is sure is that there's a determination to regain or keep Kosovo, from the perspective you see it. So whether they would follow him into war is a complex question, but it's sure that there's the willingness to fight for Kosovo. That's for sure.
Yeah. And what's the position from the other side? Like, what are the the Albanian Kosovars? What are they saying about the situation?
Well, the Albanian Kosovars and Kosovo's government, like I mentioned earlier, they did sort of call these Serbs who set up these roadblocks. They labeled them as gangs. They labeled them as terrorists who simply want to incite violence. So there's outright criticism of them. And obviously, given that the country is around 92 or 93% ethnically Albanian, there's a lot of tension, against the Serbs. They want this to be over as fast as possible. But actually, this doesn't mean that they're taking a completely pacifist stance either. So after these roadblocks, the Kosovo government actually threatened to use force and remove the roadblocks themselves if the KFOR units didn't do it first. And so, yeah, there's obviously this sort of provocation from both sides. As we've seen, historically in the Balkans, no side wants to concede anything. So that's led to even more friction. And so, yeah.
For people that don't know, maybe just explain what the KFOR security force is.
So essentially, the KFOR is, the NATO Kosovo force. It's stationed in the region. It intervened in 1999. And as of now, it has a strength of around 3,762 soldiers. I think that was the latest number. And so just for some historical concept, KFOR, as well as the whole international community, they have a big influence in the region. So in 1999, a year after Kosovo had begun its fight for independence, NATO, notably, through KFOR, intervened, and they started bombing Serbia and Kosovo to push back Serbian forces. And so that's why there's a lot of stigma regarding NATO and the West in Serbia, but that's also why there's a lot of love for the West down south in Kosovo. And KFOR is still active. They're still very, very much on the ground in Kosovo. And obviously they've been put in even more pressure now because they were given, that statement from the Kosovo government saying that, well, if you don't intervene, we will. And that's an absolute nightmare scenario. So it's interesting to see how it's going to escalate in the upcoming days, weeks, and months, and how KFOR is perhaps going to have to make a decision soon.
I'm interested in a response from the Prime Minister of Kosovo, Albin Kurti. The reason I said it is I actually interviewed him when he was under house arrest before he became the Prime Minister. I mean, this was I think 2016 when he was letting off tear gas grenades or tear gas canisters in Parliament in protest against, allegedly, I don't know, it was like, I forget now, but it's something to do with ceding land to Serbia. There was some deal where both sides decided to swap this bit of land for that bit of land. And Albin Kurti is actually believes in, Greater Albania. He actually had the historical Greater Albania map on his wall in his house when I interviewed him. And it's it's very clear that he wants a lot more than what's there. So I'm interested. Has he said anything like particularly inflammatory? Because he is, he's a Vetvan dossier, they have their issues and they have some good things as well, his political party, but he is at heart an ultra-nationalist, an Albanian ultra-nationalist. So I was wondering what what his point of view has been.
For sure. Actually, I think it was on November 24th, perhaps, or just around late November of 2022. He mentioned that although they would stop the reform for those license plates, it was time for big steps. So that's when he started to talk about the French-German proposal, the one I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, it's absolutely correct. he does genuinely believe, Albin Kurti does genuinely believe in those notions of Greater Albania. But what's interesting is it doesn't seem to be, from what I found anyway, there doesn't seem to be one general plan for what that means for Kosovo. So although that notion of Greater Albania reveals a lot about his ideology and his goals, when it comes to the negotiation table, he hasn't proposed anything, let's say, too provocative, where they would take too much land or more land than now. But what's for sure is that, to the very least, Serbia will at least be negotiating for the Serbian majority regions in Kosovo. There's a few municipalities, I believe it's around 10, that are Serbian, like Serbian-led, Serbian majority, and the vast majority are in the north. So in the case that it does come to the negotiation table, I think the very least that Serbia, will accept will be at least getting those Serbian territories from the north of Kosovo. But obviously, as you mentioned, it doesn't seem that Albin Kurti will be, open to that, especially because he believes in those greater ambitions for Kosovo.
Yeah, I will say though, I do think he's not like an unreasonable guy as far as I've noticed. I mean, he has his ideas. Everybody in that region has some form of opposing ideas, but I think I don't know. It seems at the moment it seems to be holding. Do you think that is because neither side actually wants this to be happening? Often politicians will say this is going to happen, that's going to happen to appeal to whoever's watching. But do you think there's actually an appetite for this from either side?
Well, to be quite honest, this might be quite controversial, but I believe that there might be some sort of benefits for both governments, or mostly for the Serbian government, to have these tensions. We've seen it with Erdogan in Turkey, especially with the Kurdish crisis. But usually presidents that are under a lot of heat like to distract the population by sort of, causing a sort of conflict when it comes to foreign policy. And I think that Vučić could be attempting to regain some of his popularity by, first of all, setting ablaze this escalation in Kosovo, but then managing to get some concrete steps when it comes to the negotiations and stuff like that, and to then gain somewhat credibility. So although I wouldn't go as far as to say that there's an appetite, for war or conflict or confrontation, that's, there's still some very limited benefits, mostly for Serbia, for this escalation. And I think that's, it's pretty self-explanatory, but I think there's a lot of benefits for Russia. As I mentioned earlier, the fact that there's a lot of reports that Moscow wants this second front, this second sort of layer to their war. So I think if we're talking about appetite and if we're talking about concrete benefits to this escalation, Moscow is the only winner here.
I think that's spot on, to be honest. I think you're right, especially for the leadership in Serbia, especially after all the kind of problems they've had. Let's talk about Putin then, because he is obviously, in some degree, he does have power over Serbia. Maybe not like the kind of power that the West makes out, but certainly everybody seems to be a lot more pro-Putin, especially in like I said, in Kosovo. I know he's a lot more popular there. Well, with the Serbs, what's his kind of stance? Has he said anything publicly or what?
Well, Putin has said quite a public things about the situation. He mentioned that they would support Vučić and the Serbian government entirely in their defense of, he said this, quote unquote, they would help them defend Serbian populations in Kosovo. So once again, that's a play on words, because then it would be subject to his definition of what Serbs in Kosovo really are. But yeah, it's clear that Putin is willing to support Serbia in the case that there's, this conflict or further escalation in Kosovo. But I think what's even more interesting is, when I've been in Serbia, there's a lot of pro-Putin sort of, well, not necessarily media, but a lot of pro-Putin elements when you walk around. So actually on the highways, there's giant, let's say, posters sponsored by Gazprom that literally read in Serbian together. And it's the flag of Russia hugging the flag of Serbia. Also, when you walk around the center, there's a lot of stores selling, shirts with the Z on it. Yeah. A lot of shirts with the Russian flag. A lot of Russian nationalist symbols. But what I've noticed is that a lot of them are frowned upon. So once again, there's this variation. There are definitely a lot of Serbs who agree with Russia and who want to use this opportunity to sort of, in a way, teach the West a lesson per se, and try to resist what they view as Western bullying. but a lot of them frown upon it, and a lot of Serbs think that this escalation is not worth it, and that we shouldn't be siding with the Russian side to begin with.
Yeah, I think it's the kind of cheerleading gamification of this war. I've never seen it so rampant like this before, and I think it's because it's also so local. But each side connects to something else. Like we've said, if you're in Serbia, like it or not, it makes sense that people would be like, "Oh no, we're pro-Russia in this because of what happened with the West and Kosovo." And then if you're obviously in Albania, you're going to be more pro-West because the Americans and the West and Britain, help the Albanians. I think a lot of people perhaps don't see it directly for the situation that it is. And actually, if Russia does get to open this kind of second front, it's not like they're gonna just say, "Oh yeah, you deal with it, Serbia." I mean, I don't know about you, but it feels like Serbia will then become a bit of a vassal state for Russia if that were to happen. What do you think?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I do generally think this, and unfortunately, from my experience, now I don't want to pretend I'm speaking on behalf of all Serbs or anything, but from my experience, Serbia, we've suffered quite a bit by thinking that Russia is our majestic savior, that they're our allies in resisting Western bullying. But many of the times it seems like we've just manipulated state, and whether it has to do with economic deals or this situation once again where we're almost pushed into conflict with Kosovo, and then we don't even realize that it's actually just Russia trying to gain a second front there. So now obviously it's just my opinion, but I am generally convinced that a lot of Serbs will share this idea, that perhaps Russia is a historical ally, but that in recent times it's mostly used Serbia, as you've mentioned, a vessel state, almost like Belarus, sort of manipulating the political conditions there for its own benefit.
In terms of the youth, what are the youth kind of saying? I know you're obviously, you're a young guy. What are people around about your age kind of saying about this situation? If they're even, if they're even that really plugged into it. The reason I ask is because if, God forbid, a war does kick off, it's going to be a lot of them that are pulled into it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We've seen that the same in Ukraine. A lot of young people
Yeah.
get dragged, into wars that they've not caused. Well, the truth is, what I've noticed is that it differs a lot from the regions of Serbia you're in. So actually, when you're in very urban areas, very much in the center of the city, a lot of the youth is not pro-Russia at all. I wouldn't go as far as to say they're pro-Ukraine, but they're very neutral on their perspective. They wouldn't necessarily pick up arms and fight for Serbia and Kosovo. But then when you start going into the outsides of the city and perhaps into what you could classify as like the hood, or the more low income areas, I do feel like more of the youth is actually has more ambitions to fight. So I've noticed that there's this big disparity within the youth in Serbia, depending on the sort of environment that they've been raised in.
Yeah, I think that's a given for any war. In terms of youth unemployment and things like that, what's it like in Serbia? I'll be honest with you, I'm not fully, I don't know about anything like that economically.
No worries. Well, the truth is we have the Serbian dinar, which is a pretty by European standards. Jobs aren't necessarily very well paid. It's pretty hard to make a very, very, let's say good living there. But the youth is generally determined, and I think we'll see this with more and more pressure. There's a lot of the youth is opposing Vučić, actually. A lot of the youth is very vocal against Vučić. A lot of them think that he's made a lot of mistakes at the leadership position. And so I think that if there is a chance for the youth to take control of their own futures, it'll be by putting this pressure on Vučić and eventually opening up space for actual democratic elections. Because that's something I've definitely noticed. The youth in Serbia is quite vocal against Vučić, and I think that's pretty universal for the whole youth.
Yeah, that's a good point. I saw when I was watching the protests, and a friend of mine, she was involved at the time. The anti-government protest. It was mostly the youth, but as you said earlier, like a kind of a war. You never know how that can kind of unify people. It's an age-old play by a lot of politicians. Hopefully it doesn't get to that. But do you think this is one of the more serious situations? As we said at the start, this has been happening for a long time now. Do you think this is like maybe, I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is this the most serious it's been? Or is it not that bad? Or, where do you what's the temperature from your perspective?
Well, if I'm being honest, I think this could be like the most significant escalation in recent times, and the sole factor to that being the war in Russia, the war in Ukraine as well. So I think that is the main thing that distinguishes this escalation from the ones in the past. It's that now that there's war in Ukraine, this escalation could actually materialize if Russia does decide to get involved even more. And so this is why I think, yeah, for sure, this is perhaps the most significant escalation. So far, if I'm being honest, I think KFOR has done a relatively good job at promoting de-escalation and more pacifism in the region. But tension is still there, and I think it could take just one wrong turn, one wrong, let's say, murder actually, even because earlier we mentioned the shots being fired and no one knowing where they came from. But God forbid if these shots did end up actually harming someone, the implications would be drastic. So I think it takes just one little small mistake, and this escalation would generally turn into the most serious one, notably because of Russia's influence here.
You're right. It literally just takes one stray bullet or the wrong thing happening, and it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. In terms of KFOR, yeah, I agree. I went to a Serbian monastery. It's one of the, I think, I don't know if it's the only one, but the one that's Serbian monastery in Kosovo that's completely surrounded by ethnic Albanian communities, and they of course, as is the situation, they were getting attacked. People would spray graffiti now and then, and I think there was like Molotovs and stuff thrown at the walls. To be honest, like the KFOR presence was pretty standoffish in terms of like they weren't too involved. But without them, there'd be just no way to I mean, I very much doubt that it would stay calm without them. So I think that you're right. It's an unusual stance to have because I know a lot of people around that region don't like them. But yeah, from what I observed, I thought, yeah, they're actually, I mean, they're absolutely necessary. But it was quite interesting to see that they kind of worked. However, that said, I don't want to say there's loads of guns in the region, but there are guns in the region, and there are still existing militia groups, kind of breakaways of the KLA, the Kosovo Liberation Army, being the ethnic Albanian side. And I know I read quite an interesting article actually by a Serbian writer about the influence of Russian-backed militia groups in Serbia, and actually a lot of weird British fascists that have gone over to Serbia, and they are actually backed by Russia as well, and they've been trying to stir tension. Have you got any insight into those groups?
Well, there's some insight, notably on the KLA and let's say like former groups that were there during the Third Balkan Wars during the the 90s. What's known about the KLA now is that some of the former KLA fighters are now just regular Kosovar police officers.
Yeah.
And so obviously that's stirred a lot, even more attention for the Serbian side, because in Serbia they view the KLA as terrorists essentially, and so the fact that they are now, some of them are members of the police force in Kosovo, for them is absolutely unacceptable. In regards to other groups, I think what's very particular or interesting even about that region of the world is that I think it's extremely easy to form an insurgent group there. We've seen it, especially during the Yugoslav wars. You've had groups like the Arkan's Tigers, who were just football hooligans, and they decided to pick up arms. They even had their infamous tiger with them. So I think it's perhaps the former groups have sort of disbanded, but I think for sure they could easily come back at any given time, or new ones could form as well, just as easily.
And on the other side, do you know much about those ones, the Serb militia type groups?
Other than Arkan's Tigers, Arkan was killed in the early 2000s. Many of the groups, notably the ones who had their campaigns in Bosnia, they've been completely disbanded. Many of their leaders have been killed, assassinated in the streets. But there's for sure still, fighters who are most likely just walking around. Actually, if I may just cite Šešelj, which was one of the main, leaders of the Serbian campaign during the Yugoslav wars, was he was trialed in the Hague and came out with no let's say crime, or no punishment for his involvement in the Yugoslav wars, and
several times, if I remember right.
Yep, that's correct. And Šešelj today is just a politician in Serbia. And so these are the type of individuals that are notably in the spotlight here. If there was an escalation, these people would at the very first opportunity they would come back and at least join a resistance on the Serbian side. And actually, if I may just add, I think this is quite interesting. A lot of people don't necessarily understand this. Earlier you mentioned, the monastery in Kosovo, the Serbian monastery. The main reason as to why Serbs care, so much about Kosovo is because of the importance it's had on Serbian proto-nationalism. So actually, like, many Serbs refer to the region as their Jerusalem, because that's where Serbian monarchy was birthed. The first instance of Serbian proto-nationalism was during the Battle of Kosovo, and that was in June 1389. So if my math is correct, that's just under 700 years ago. And so, that's why Serbs do generally care that much about Kosovo. They believe that it's the heart of Serbia. That's why there's a lot of songs during the riots that Serbs would lead, singing Kosovo is the heart of Serbia. Serbia is not Serbia without Kosovo. That's why it has this connotation as sort of the heart of the country. And so this is why I think, linking back to insurgent groups, like I mentioned, Sheshel or others, they would easily come back into the struggle for the region.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's a situation that no one wants to see happen. Is there anything else you want to go over in regard to this situation?
I think we've covered pretty much everything, especially in regards to the escalation. So I think, that's pretty much it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, mate. If people want to get hold of you and look at your work, where can they do it?
Well, we're mostly active, on Instagram at Modern Insurgent. We also have our own website, moderninsurgent.org. So yeah, they can reach out there and see our content on specific groups.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Of course.
That was researcher, writer, and head of Modern Insurgent, Antoine Brimbal. He's a very, very good up-and-comer. He is only 19, and that is one of the most nuanced conversations I've ever had with anybody about the situation in Kosovo. Definitely check them out, moderninsurgent.org. It's very interesting, something original, and I really like it. I back it. I think it's great. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, trying to bring attention to underreported conflict situations, please do consider supporting us. There's lots of bonus content at patreon.com/popularfront. That's how we keep things moving forward. Also, if you want, you can buy merchandise at popularfront.shop. Believe it or not, a lot of that actually funds our documentaries. We have a new documentary out right now at youtube.com/popularfront. It's called Partisan 22. I think what's the YouTube title? I think it's Russia's anti-Putin underground. It's a documentary about literally that, anti-Putin, Russian partisan saboteurs. It's been received well. People like it. Go and watch it if you want. Thank you very much to our sponsors. They are Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. They're an independent coffee business selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 South West Bond Avenue, 97239. Also, thank you to Grindcore House, a pair of independent coffee shops in Philadelphia, USA, one in South and one in West. Find them on social media at Grindcore House. And also thank you to Propagandopolis, an outlet selling and writing about historical conflict propaganda from around the world. You can buy prints at propagandopolis.com. Use a promo code POPULARFRONT10 for 10% off. Follow us on social media. Twitter at popularfront_, Instagram at popular.front, TikTok at popular.front, and of course youtube.com/popularfront. Music in this episode, the intro was by Home and the outro was by Sam Black. See his music at samblackpf.com. Thank you very much to the high tier Patreons. They are Christian Bustamante, Mike Jones, Britt Richardson, Victor Villa, Daniel Verdin, Margosha, Rohan Irvin, Titus Perkins, Ryan Barbadillo, VS, Brian R, Evan Pank, Bradley Hope, Wizard Actual, Claire Hofbauer, Benjamin Topper, Chungus Bongwater, Siddhartha O, Damien, Cameron Collins, Q Loves Cake. That's that fucking name, man. Nicholas Blomberg, Matthew Diffley, Claire, Liana, Robert, Sean, Christianovich, NTHG, Arthur Raphael Macias, Ethan Zwick, Kefir is the Mind Killer, Elise Middlefart, David McManus, Tom Petrie, James Lyons, Bradley Davies, No Dogs, No Hamsters, Brendan Crave, B, Drift, RX, Tiki Lover, Ben Marshall, Dallas Dunn, Shikhar Gupta, LD50 Seattle, K Glitter Vulcan, Bethany Swoland, Adam H, Derivative Fool, Bottle of Water, Larson 8669, Ivan Julien, Bjorn Kirsten, DS, Michael O'Connor, Disgrunt, Jack Doherty, Nicholas Butter, JD, Jav, James Cully, Tynan Daly, Ethan, Shanklin the Painter, Fitz Madrid, Ed Coulthard, D. San, Mike Barone, Ben, Liam Williams, Chris Cusimano, DZA, Georgia Arani, DR, Amy R, Rubicon, Frank Austin, Amelia Me, Christina Ravetti, Freya Northman, Neber, Noah, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochrin, Young Wasabi, Tony Bin, JL, Stephen Davila, Dan Dunham, Chad Walker, Lawrence Abrahams, What Bitcoin Did with Peter McCormick, Christopher Martin and Ryan Sandercock. Thank you all so much. Support us at patreon.com/popularfront.